on one sec. Let's get this going. And then this just takes a minute for kind of everything to catch up. I just want to warn everyone while this is going, if you have this, if you're watching us in Zoom right now and you also have this open in your browser on Integral Live, you'll get a feedback loop like I think I'm about to in just a moment. In Zoom right now. There it is, right on cue. So make sure you pause any streaming videos you might have. Let me click this button right here. That's going to go out. And here we go. And here you guys are. Dr. Keith, good to see you, man.
Good to see you. I want to introduce everybody to my daughter, Zoe Ashton Witt. She's visiting, and I asked her if she could be on the show, and she said, sure. She spent a year at the California Institute for Integral Studies before she dropped out. You know, I thought we'd have, she has her own experiences, opinions, having grown up in an integrally informed household. And I thought she could participate in the show, and she said, sure. I thought that would be fun.
That's amazing. Zoe, it's so awesome to have you here. We were saying pre-show, I've heard like just so much about you over the years, and I can definitely say your father loves you very, very much.
I love him very, very much.
It's a beautiful thing.
Really excited to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you both.
Yeah, absolutely. And anytime. You said very kind things about me before we started the show about my age. So
I still don't, I want to see a driver's license. I don't believe it.
I'll get my long form birth certificate.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So you are definitely welcome to come here anytime you want. And Dr. Keith, what are we going to talk about today, man?
We're going to talk about if you're an integral, if you studied integral, you know what the 3-2-1 process is. Ken talks about it in detail in a number of his books. It's a way of dealing with projections and shadow. There's the 3-2-1 process basically is you're experiencing, say, distress. In the third person, I'm distressed, there's some distress around. You turn it into the second person, I'm distressed with you. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then as I look at how I'm distressed to you, how am I projecting myself somehow into my distress on you? And now I'm back to me, first person, 3-2-1. It's a useful technique. Most people use it. It's not the only technique that shifts perspectives. And also it's a cognitive technique. And I wanted to place it within the context of cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and psychotherapy in general. And also, when you're dealing particularly with interior conflicts, there's another process where you start out in the first person feeling distress, and then you move from the second to the third and then back to the first. It's the 1-2-3-1 process. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit, just because it's useful. And again, it fits into the larger narrative of psychotherapy in general, cognitive therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Fantastic, man. And you know, it's great because this fits into sort of this this overall arc that we've been doing here at Integral Life over the last couple of months, where we've been having this ongoing series of conversations about shadow, because it is, and it can be so problematic. And it's one of those things where, you know, as soon as you stop paying attention to your own shadow, it bites you right in the ass, right? I mean, it's just sort of the structure of these things. And especially now that we are, about 60 days away from this election.
Oh my God.
People's shadows are flared up more than ever before. And all of us seem to be, in a lot of ways, standing directly in each other's shadows. And that's preventing so much genuine, authentic conversation from emerging. It's preventing new innovative ideas from emerging in the culture around us. And it's just honestly kind of painful to, you know, to be subject to, especially for this duration of time. So the timing of this conversation is totally right on.
Well, and as you know, my own take on shadow, that is, I go on at length in my book, Shadow Light, is that shadow is the entire adaptive unconscious that's constantly informing us with positive, pro-social, and wise impulses and stories, and generally positive affects, and informing us from destructive shadow, where we have associations, destructive habits, defensive states, prejudices, those kinds of things. And my belief is that consciousness is a narrow little film on top of these fountains of unconscious material, shadow material, that only comes into awareness when we allow it to. And I think the development is very much learning how to distinguish between what positive shadow is, what positive unconscious material, and surrender to it. Our wise guide, our inner wisdom, our loving self, and so on, and to distinguish destructive shadow, our defensive self, projection, all the defenses, distress with self, judgments, critical evaluations of self and other. And then taking that destructive stuff, recognizing it as destructive material coming up for some reason, and dialyzing it into integration and into constructive shadow. And I think that basically is what growth is in human beings. When we talk about transformation, we talk about development, we're not talking about getting new ideas. We're not talking about necessarily even new things that we can do, though doing new things is important. We're talking about our unconscious having changed, where we have different reactions in situations where we used to have more distressed or stereotyped reactions. Now we're having new ones, where once I might have gotten pissed off and defensive, I now get more curious and compassionate. That's my unconscious having grown, my shadow self having matured. And the 3-2-1 and the 1-2-3-1 that I'm going to talk about are a couple of techniques for facilitating that process.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Zoe, it's great to have you on with us too, because clearly one of the areas or dimensions of our lives where we really feel the impact of our own shadow the most is in our relationships, both with loved ones, with our kids, with our families, with our employers and our friends. I mean, all of that. So when you're in a situation where you're in a relationship and both people, for example, don't have the language to think about or talk about or to make object out of subject when it comes to this shadow material, the relationship tends to suffer. And the relationships I've seen where you actually have a more open consciousness, you have better communication, you have more authentic relating, you actually are able to help each other with each other's shadows. And, I mean, in our family, we kind of poke fun at each other and try to laugh about our shadows and try to develop that sort of anti-fragility. But, it's because we're in this loving kind of connected relationship where we can do that, and we can sort of be supportive of each other while, maybe a little bit passive aggressively antagonistic, but that's okay too. Right? That's not my shadow. That's just.
Well, how do you think we handle shadow in our family, Zoe?
Well, something that I really deeply appreciated about our family was just the willing to talk about it. Like there was this kind of open, incredibly open space that as I aged, I realized was extremely rare, like none of my friends had it, and they were surprised when they saw that I did. And so that was absolutely indispensable. I mean, I really don't think, I don't know what I would be like if that hadn't been a thing. So, and that really helped to kind of buffer the fact that me and you, were very similar. And so speaking of shadow and how, what most irritates us in others is something that we have that's unresolved in ourselves. We were just kind of in a lot of ways, a feedback loop, or just kind of, we always talked about it like just, and so it was very hard for me in a lot of ways. It's funny, I was just talking with Mom about that earlier, where it's like, it was really difficult. I still get angry sometimes, but like, what's wonderful is that we've both done enough growth, and I really see it in you a lot, where I can go to him now and say like, listen, that pattern you had when I was 15, like, you see how that was pretty messed up, and then he will say, you're right, full stop. And I mean, like, what better gift is that, when someone comes up to you and says, listen, I think you were wrong, and you just say, you're right. And that's it. There was such healing there. And then of course that makes me feel like I can be like, well, you know, I was wrong too.
Right. Right.
So I'm really, I guess I'm really grateful for the communication.
Yeah.
Created a groundwork for a lot of healing to happen despite our issues.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And, you know, I love hearing it because, you know, Keith, I've told you many times, I mean, you're such a great friend to me. I see you so much as like a mentor and a role model. And, you know, I've got a 7-year-old daughter. So we're beginning this journey together. And when
You're well on the way at 7.
well, yeah, exactly. And when I see the quality of the relationship and just the mutual love and respect and admiration you guys have for each other, it fills my heart and it makes me really that much more hopeful for, you know, my ongoing relationship with my own kid. So that's really wonderful.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So 3, 2, 1 versus 1, 2, 3, 1, I think is how you
It's not worth we go versus. So first of all, in psychotherapy, there's been progressive psychotherapy. There's been a subtle dismissiveness about cognitive therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy. And so, and I've had that myself for 50 or 60 years. And one great thing about Integral is whenever you're dismissive about something, you know, if you turn over that rock of the dismissal, there's going to be something cool underneath it, something useful. And so recently, I was aware of that and I thought, so I should study cognitive therapy some. And so I got some cognitive therapy stuff, started studying. I went, wait a minute, this is good stuff. And one of the reasons that it's good is because everybody who does therapy focuses on what we think and what insights we have and what structures that we organize the world with.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that has been was accepted in a lot of psychotherapy for the past 50 or 60 years, which I think is a false assumption, is that you can't directly affect your emotions. Psychotherapists say you can't decide to be joyful or grateful or so on. So then, but you can decide where to focus your attention. You can decide what structure of what story you're going to embrace. You can decide on what behavior. So cognitive behavioral therapy became really big in response to these are the things we can control. And then if you do that, the understanding was that emotion would come around.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like everybody gets to be right, but nobody gets to be right all the time. As it turns out, you absolutely can change your emotion. Heart math is all about generating gratitude at the drop of a hat. I am generating gratitude right now. Well, I've practiced heart math for 20 years. If you do contemplative practice, you go into your place, wherever your contemplative place is, you're altering your state of consciousness and the affect is altered. So that's not exactly right that you can't choose an emotion, but it's absolutely right that when you have an emotion, you also have a story, you have a structure of consciousness, and you also have action tendencies. Mm-hmm. And if those are not congruent, you have problems. Okay, so if I'm feeling compassionate and I'm engaged in violent action, I'm going to get disorganized in my mind and I start dissociating and getting weird. Okay. Or if I say, I'm Mr. Mellow and I love everybody and so on, inside I'm pissed off about something and I'm denying it. Okay. I'm going to get disorganized. And so part of congruence is being consciously aware. Now, this is the cognitive capacity of all that stuff. And specifically, an awful lot of human problems come from projection. In other words, if I don't like the violence in you, or I don't like the darkness in you, or I don't like the meanness in you, or the selfishness in you, or whatever I'm observing, I'm actually projecting part of my selfishness, meanness, darkness onto you. And then as I attack you in that, this is called projective identification, I don't have to look at my own. Okay. And the 3-2-1 process was specifically designed to address that. Okay. So so you describe it. You're pretty good at describing 3-2-1. Corey, describe the 3-2-1 process.
Oh, Jesus, man. Come on. You're the professional.
You can do it.
You did this to me last night with Integral. It's like, explain Integral to me. I'm like,
right. Yeah, break it down.
I mean, I'll do it if you want, but you did a good job the last time I asked you. Go on.
No, it's fine. You know, my understanding of the 3-2-1 process, you know, the way I tend to conceive it is it's a reclaiming process. It's being able to recognize and discern those aspects of your conscious experience and awareness right now that you are either projecting out onto something else or some element of the world out there that you are sort of claiming as your own when it never really belonged to you in the first place. And we do so by basically running that through all three of these major perspectives. So for example, something starts off as, you know, a first person subjective shadow material, a discomfort or an unease or an avoidance or an addiction. I mean, any of these can be manifestations of our shadow, but it starts off as this very, very sort of first person place that is, you know, oftentimes very difficult for us to see as an object. So what we do is we project it out there, and we project it into the second person space between us. So I'm not being avoidant. I'm not being aggressive. I'm not being any of these things. You are, and you're a fucking asshole for acting in this way. And I can't, you know, how dare you? And then you can even push it out even further to the point where you can actually start relating to some of these, you know, sort of streaks within yourself as third person objects. And when you do so, you can actually re-engage in a more meaningful dialogue, actually being able to recognize and discern the shadow for what it is, bring it out of third person back into second person, and then finally re-owning it in first. So it's sort of this move out from first, second into third person, and then this inhalation from third, second back to first, so that you can re-own this aspect of yourself that until now has largely been unintegrated and causing all sorts of problems in your unconscious. Now, I think that's one type of shadow, though, right? I mean, there's projection, there's introflexion, there's all these different sort of patterns by which these shadows can, you know, jump through these perspectival hoops. But the 3-2-1 is a bit of a panacea for all of these different kinds of shadow material.
Yeah,
How'd I
Kim
do?
draws his understanding of shadow a lot from the Gestalt understanding back in the 70s, retroflexion and interjection, that kind of stuff. So you notice as you're doing that, each one of those is a different perspective. And so when you direct yourself to go to a different perspective and you go to a different perspective, things change. Right. Because that's a form of self-regulation. And if you're going through a different perspective, looking for more deeper understanding, you're actually going against the current of projection, because projection distorts. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Say I'm upset at the world. Okay? The world sucks. Okay, that's 3. Okay, that's the third person perspective. And then I go, well, actually, what I am is I'm upset with Zoe. Okay, that's a second person. I'm not. The world doesn't suck. I'm just mad at my daughter. Okay. Oh, I'm mad at my daughter. Okay. So what am I mad about? I'm about this and this. Go. Maybe I'm projecting a little bit of my own whatever, you know, my own something, my own bias. Tone. There you go. My nasty tone onto her. She's not using a good tone. Wait a minute. I use a bad tone.
She had a quick. I noticed she had a quick answer for that.
Oh yeah, she had just a quick answer. And so now I'm back to, oh, you know, that's kind of me. You know, that's me not using the right tone. When I demand a good tone, when I am pushing, and that's like maybe what I'm doing is avoiding awareness that I am. And then when I get that, something changes. Now remember, at each one of these places, the third person, second person, first person, there's a different emotional tone. There's a different affective atmosphere. And this is what I think it was not acknowledged by the people, and has not been acknowledged sometimes by the people that are a little bit distressed with cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. There's an assumption that affective tone changes when you're able to shift perspective, and it does. Now, to the people that felt like emotion was being fought against or being denied, they came up with therapies that really put emotion forefront. You know, emotionally focused therapy with Susan Johnson and Greenwald is one example. Or accelerated emotionally focused therapy with Diana Fosha. They wanted to say, look, that if we're not shifting our affective states, if we're not feeling better, understanding our interior experience better, then therapy is an exercise in blah, blah, which is true. If there's no affective core, if you're not dealing with it, then you're not really doing therapy, you're doing pretend therapy. Now, one thing that I wanted to mention is another process of perspectives. And that's what I call the 1, 2, 3, 1 process. The 1, 2, 3, 1 process is especially effective when we're dealing with different parts of ourselves. We are intensely relational beings. And we have relationships with all the different parts of ourselves, as well as objects and people and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Often people have conflicted relationship with some aspect of themselves, and that's where shame emotion comes in, dissociation comes in, self-loathing, self-criticism, all that kind of stuff. And so that shows up. So say I'm doing Tai Chi and I have this flash of bullying somebody when I was 12 years old. And I feel this flush of shame. Shame is an interior sense of I am not an okay person, okay? It's a very unpleasant first person experience. And mostly what we learn to do is to regulate away from it. That remind ourselves, tell ourselves that we're better people, to think about something else, to say, yeah, well, that kid deserved it, something like that. Mm-hmm. But if you allow yourself to feel that, you can now go through a progression to resolve that issue, which is an interior relational issue, by going through the similar perspectives. So I can say to myself, I can shift from the first person, I'm terrible, into the second person. I can say, Keith, you were involved in a conflicted relationship with that kid. There was provocation going back and forth. You guys kind of positioned each other, kind of learned something about violence, being a 12-year-old boy. Later on, you and he reconciled and became somewhat friendly with each other. Now, as I do this, as I'm shifting into a second person with an aspect of myself, my affect changes. I'm not feeling as much shame. I'm feeling a little bit of interest. I'm feeling a little bit more understanding. Yeah. But still, I'm a little bit embarrassed. And what does that mean about me that I engaged in that thing? I can shift into the third person. This is a very common technique in cognitive therapy. So I can narrate my life to myself. I can go, well, Keith had grown up in a family that was ambivalent about anger and violence. He was encouraged to be violent on some hand, but he didn't like violence, which confused him. And he was in a way experimenting with that in his relationships with other male people, other boys, particularly in the school. And he experimented with that bully consciousness with this kid. Didn't work. He didn't like it, and eventually reconciled. Now, as I do that, Keith sounds like a pretty good guy. Okay, now I'm back inside myself in the first person going, okay, not only can I remember that event without the shame, which is one of the signs that you've done trauma work. One of the signs that you do trauma work is you remember the traumatic event and you don't have the same emotional signature or the same story.
Right.
The emotional signature is more connected, more compassionate, less hostility, less shame, less guilt, more care. And the story has a deeper resonance with your own autobiographical narrative. Mm-hmm. It fits more into a virtuous story. And that's the 1, 2, 3, 1 process. And these processes are enormously effective. Now, one thing that we don't talk about enough is that to do these processes, you have to be able to regulate your emotional states. You have to watch your arousal levels and keep your arousal levels in what's called the window of tolerance in trauma research. Window of tolerance is I'm not so jacked up that I can't process information, and I'm not so shut down that I can't. Mm-hmm. It's about 100. If your resting pulse is 100, in the absence of exercise, you're probably getting to a level of arousal where your information capacity and your self-observation capacities are compromised. And this is what happens when when our nervous system reaches threat, we enter a defensive state. We get into these hyper or hypo aroused states and we can't process. And so to do the 1, 2, 3 or the 3, 2, 1 or the 1, 2, 3, 1 process, You have to regulate yourself into that window of tolerance, and then do the processes. And when you do, it works really well.
Right.
Now, what some cognitive therapists forget is that in a relationship, in a psychotherapeutic relationship, the intersubjectivity of the relationship is a regulator into social engagement. And so part of what is necessary in psychotherapy is to teach people how to do that themselves and with other people. And when you hit that level to know, okay, I'm in social engagement with myself, I'm in the window of tolerance. Now I can use these more sophisticated techniques. And there's a lot of them.
Right.
And the 1, 2, 3 and the 1, 2, 3, 1 and the 3, 2, 1 are all cognitive techniques. And I know integral gets a little bit of shade cast on it for being too cognitive, which hopefully Zoe and you can have a little conversation about it a little bit.
Yep.
But all psychotherapies involve a cognitive understanding and stories, as well as emotions, as well as behaviors, as well as your body, how your body functions, posture, tone, all that kind of stuff. Body, mind, spirit, and self-culture and nature, they all involved a cultural embeddedness that we need to be aware of or not be aware of. We were talking about that, about the book White Fragility in the beginning of the session. All those things inform the present moment. To the extent we're aware of those things, we regulate them. Awareness regulates. And we have deeper understanding. And that's, of course, why the people that are excited about integral became excited about integral. It gave us an expanded understanding of ourself in the universe and the universe in us. And that's the 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1 processes put into the context of the emergent field of psychotherapy going into the 21st century.
It's gorgeous. It's totally gorgeous. And, for me, it was sort of, I'm someone who definitely from time to time slips into those sort of hyper aroused, very active, maybe triggered kind of state.
No, not you, Corey.
I mean, every now and then, every, few years, maybe. But one of the things I noticed is that there's this catch-22 that really, really does foreground the need for practice and the need for legitimate state training and this ability to actually regulate and modulate your own states doesn't come online kind of spontaneously. Because when you're in this really hyper aroused, activated, kind of triggered space, your capacity to recognize, right, those guardrails, the capacity to say, hey, okay, I'm kind of steaming right now, I need to go, that capacity is diminished, right? So the more kind of worked up you get, the less your ability is to kind of catch yourself and cool down and then re-engage the conversation later on. And this just seems to me just the territory of practice. The more you do this, the more you kind of learn how to train these states of consciousness, both your emotional states and otherwise, the more capacity you'll have to see yourself when you're kind of going down that rabbit hole.
Well, I'm going to say something, and you have something to say. Alan Shore, the father of interpersonal neurobiology, said that affect regulation is basically the bottom line in development, relationships, personal integration, and psychotherapy. And he's right about that. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. The practices, if we develop a habit of consciousness, of going to distress, which many of us do, the nervous system, if there's pain, goes to the pain to try to resolve it. Unfortunately, when you focus on an affect, it amplifies it. And so when you go to depression or anxiety or contempt or shame and so on, because your instinct is to go to that to try to figure it out, you end up self-amplifying it. Mm. And so the practice of attending to it and talking about it and bringing attention to it causes problems. So you want to go to it to understand what's going on, and then you want to cultivate other affective states with practices, other frameworks that are better, more compassionate, more accurate frameworks, and other behaviors that aren't consistent with the impulses that happen when you're distressed. And the reason I was looking at Zoe is I remember when she was in my family, there's a history for some of us to go crazy when we're 12 or 13. And, to have to deal with all kinds of difficult problems. My mom had it, I had it, Zoe had it. it passed over Ethan. My son.
God damn it.
I know, it wasn't fair. So anyway, she would be really unhappy. And I would be pushing her to do practices to be happier. But my affective state when I was doing it was dismissive and coercive. And her nervous system appropriately said, don't believe anything that energy tells you.
Right.
Okay. And so I would like amp it up more. I'd get more coercive and dismissive. And she would go, no, not going to go there. And it wasn't working. That's when I got us into family therapy. And the family therapy has helped us understand it. And I realized that if I wasn't coming from a compassionate and patient place where it was completely okay with me, whatever Zoe experienced and decided to do, that I had no impact. And so I needed to focus on radical acceptance, which was very difficult when she was unhappy.
Yeah.
You remember those times.
Oh yeah. I was thinking of, I love hearing you say that, by the way. It's just, but I was thinking of a time when you did it right, and it stood out in my mind because there was a lot of kind of like fear around the idea of me going crazy, right? And as I could feel myself kind of going crazy, like between 12 and 15.
Which is when I went crazy when I was a kid.
Yeah. There was this huge kind of like desire to lean into it, because there was all this fear and all this judgment. So I was like, okay, you want to see crazy? Yeah. And so there was this one time, I remember I was like 15 or something, and I was just yelling at you, and I was like, well, okay, I'm crazy. I'm fucking crazy. I am crazy. Your daughter is crazy. And you, all of a sudden, you went from like 100, and then you said, okay. And I immediately calmed down, dropped into that zone that you guys are talking about,
Right.
and it stood out in my memory because it was just so effective.
Well, I will say that going crazy is a perfectly sane response to an insane world. So
Yeah.
y'all got that going for you.
I love that. I love the validation.
Well, there you go.
Oh, and there was one more story that this made me think of, is that like, so from about age 12, this guy, has been trying to get me to meditate, right? Yep. And so obviously I built up this huge thing in my head over like, fuck meditate. I'm allowed to swear on this? I'm sorry.
You can say whatever you
100%.
want.
Fuck meditating.
It's YouTube. We can say whatever the fuck we want.
Yeah. And so when at my year at CIIS, it was, I had a Buddhism class. And it was a wonderful class, and our homework was to meditate. And that is one of two classes that I can remember in my life that I actively cheated. I cheated in that class. I did not meditate once, and I wrote essays, so many essays about my meditative experience. Never meditated, never did it.
Well, you lied to them.
I did. Like, I got an A in that class.
Of course
and
you
I
did.
did not deserve it. But just recently, in the last 3 months or so, I've started to meditate because I decided to. Yes. And now I see what all the fuss is about. So, it's pretty cool.
No, it's a good story, because I'm in the same position where, I'm trying to start young. I'm trying to, sort of help my daughter develop a capacity for mindfulness. And the cool thing is her school's doing it too, which is really cool to see. So
yeah,
go outside and we'll, spend just 3 minutes. I mean, limiting the amount of time is super important.
Perfect.
We'll spend 3 minutes just kind of like, what do you hear? How does the air feel on your skin? What do you see? And she comes up with these really great, I see a cobweb shaped like a hammock, and I'm like, oh, that's so good, and trying to train it. But what I notice is that it really is. It's all about the affect. It's, when I present this to her as like, this is something you should be doing because it's good for us. It's like, it tastes like broccoli and homework, right? No one wants broccoli and homework, right? You're not gonna do this sort of ongoing injunction just because someone tells you it's good for you. I mean, people tell me what's good for me all the time, and I ignore all them too. Why am I going to take you seriously? But the minute you actually start to sort of, develop a different kind of language around it and actually show, not in marketing, I call this painkiller versus vitamins. You know what I mean? Like everyone,
there you go.
be taking vitamins, but no one ever does. But when it comes to painkillers, when you actually be like, here's something that you can do, and you will notice that you're suffering less. And let's actually, spend a moment just to reflect on, how do you feel now versus how did you feel 5 minutes ago? And when you feel that release, when you feel that kind of painkiller, that I think allows us to step into it a little bit more fully, because it's not just this paternalistic thing that's being kind of dropped in our heads as like, here's the right thing to do. You're experiencing as this is a good thing to do, because it literally just makes me feel better.
I started meditating.
Beautifully said.
Yes,
Yeah.
beautifully said, Corey. And I started meditating for superpowers when I was 15.
Right. Going right to those cities, man.
And that was great. But eventually it shifted into partly and largely for a while into bliss. I meditate because of the bliss states that I routinely have meditating. And that's part of what keeps me doing it. So I think we all have a little bit of resistance, the same way we have resistance when we're at the edge of the pool for diving in. You don't want to dive in. Once you do, it gets great. But that it requires an act of will often to dive into that cold water.
Right.
Sure. Well, and I think that sometimes people have to, well, I know I did, sometimes people have to go through the process, and sometimes it takes years of like, I think that I can solve my pain from the outside. I think that I can go outside, and I think I can manipulate circumstances, and I'm going to try, and then it doesn't work, I'm going to try harder, and so for me, it hit a point where I realized that it was just never going to happen that way. And that was when I started, it was very recently that it kind of clicked for me. And that was when I started meditating, and I got the positive feedback that you guys are talking about, but like, I don't think I would have been able to do that before, because I was too convinced that it was, I still struggle with that, and once this happens though, like I'll be good. There's still a little bit of that narrative.
One thing that Zoe and I have had is we both observed the other person shift their consciousness significantly. Zoe, particularly the last 2 years, has become much more anchored in her wise self, her self-aware self, and she has tremendous psychotherapy capacities, even though she wants to be a lawyer. Both my kids have a lot of skills in that area.
Was there a little shadow in that?
Well, I know I am not distressed that being a psychotherapist is a very, very difficult profession. It's, you have to be able to tolerate an awful lot of pain to be a psychotherapist, because you have to join people in their pain for long periods of time. And if you don't love it, you shouldn't do it.
Right.
Just because you're good at it isn't a reason to do it. Yeah. But we've seen each other shift into different, more mature and more caring. And so that does two things for me. One, I know there's other shifts ahead, and I know meditation accelerates and not to mention all the other work we do. It validates the process of what you and I have done. I remember when we used to fight when Zoe was 15, 16, 17, I said, when you're in your 20s, we're going to have the greatest conversations. Mm-hmm. It's just going to be so good. It's going to be so much fun. And I haven't said this often, but several times I've said, I told you so. We were in the middle of a great conversation. Told you so. Now there's a little shadow in that. There's Keith's shadow. I told you so.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is I did never not believe you.
That's true. You did. That's true.
Well, the cool thing is once you hit a certain level of your own maturity, I'm not sure where it is exactly, but then you start being able to tell your parents, I told you so. And then it's like,
Zoe has done that on occasion.
So sweet, Oh, the turns have tabled.
Turns have tabled. So are there any questions or comments that people want to make?
Let me give the spiel to everyone. So if you're joining us right now and you have any questions or comments, there's a couple ways you can engage with us. You can either, if you're here in the Zoom app with us, you can either press the raise my hand button that lets us know that you want us to turn on your camera. We'll have some real time back and forth. It's always fun. I hope you guys do that. Or you can press the Q&A button, submit a written question. I'm also taking a look at the comments on YouTube. So if anyone has any questions there, you can feel free to submit them. And while we wait to see sort of what comes up, one of the things that it's interesting to me, Keith, is that I feel like this is often a recurring theme when we're having these conversations, when we're talking about, shadow work, cleaning up in general, it often comes back to meditation in a lot of interesting ways. And it just sort of
Yeah.
foregrounds to me how, critical this process of making subject into object, how critical that process is to all of these various vectors of our lives in terms of our growing up. It's a process of the previous stage becoming an object of our awareness, and then and now your current stage eventually becomes an object of your awareness, and on we go, and we scaffold our ways up. Same thing with waking up. The entire process of waking up is allowing your total subjectivity to become an object of consciousness, and then identifying, discerning that aspect of your subjective experience that can't be made into an object, right? And then obviously with cleaning up, that's what this entire game is allowing yourself to not be sort of trapped within these subjective shadows, but see them objectively playing themselves out as these patterns that you can intervene in and change and alter and sort of reintegrate. So just again, foregrounds to me how central this kind of mechanism is, this sort of relationship between first person and really third person, in terms of our own cognitive capacities.
It's the witness. Um,
Yeah.
well, Ken said this. He said, if you want to know about the validity of the phenomenological, you have to develop the tools. And compassionate self-awareness, self-observation, the witness is an essential tool for all this development. It is necessary, but not sufficient for waking up, cleaning up, showing up, growing up.
Mm-hmm.
One of the points that I made in Integral Mindfulness, the book that I wrote about this, is that cultivating the witness is the beginning. Okay? Now, when we cultivate the witness, when we have compassionate self-observation, we can learn to be aware of the constructive and destructive shadow material that's constantly flooding up from our unconscious into our conscious and influencing us in so many ways. And the more that we become interested in that rather than reactive to it, the more we accelerate our own development. Like I told you, I'm reading this book, White Fragility, that was written by this woman who did diversity training, D'Angelo. And she just got so fed up with doing diversity training and hearing the same damn thing over and over and over again that she wrote this book. And there's an undercurrent with her about, God damn it, this is what I've been trying to say for years. It's kind of funny, it's endearing to me. And the point that she made is that we could never see our own racism when we went, okay, racists are creeps. I'm not a creep. I can't be a racist. Okay. Yep. Okay. And her point is, when you grow up in a racist culture, you're going to be racist. And when you can look objectively at the racism as it emerges, you can actually adapt, you can actually regulate it, and you can actually grow as a human being and be a force for good. We have resistance around seeing destructive shadow, our selfish side, our egocentric side, our greedy side, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. When you're in a second tier moment on that developmental line, and you see that stuff coming up and you're interested in it rather than reacting to it, that's the philosopher's stone. That almost instantaneously integrates that material. What that does is it dialyzes destructive shadow into constructive shadow. Mm. And what we want is to make that a habit of consciousness. Now, what that does is it leads us to a life that's full of revelation. Again and again and again and again. Oh, this is a strength of mind manifesting. Compassionate witness observing. This is a weakness of mind manifesting. Oh, that's interesting. This is a bias that I have. Oh, I have a bias in that area. This is a gift that I give to other people. Oh, you're giving a gift. That feels, that level of looking at everything with interest, okay? which is exactly what Theravada Buddhism is. Right. The fourfold path, right? It's the lack of attachment is not disinterest. It's I'm interested in everything. Okay. And meditation is so far the best way to develop that witness. Now, if you just have the compassionate witness when you meditate and you turn it off when you do other stuff, what good is it? Right. It doesn't do any good whatsoever. Okay?
Right.
You practice it so that you can call on it, the wise self, to help guide you through the world. As you do that, more and more your primary identity is wise self. And if your primary identity is wise self, as you're guiding yourself through the world, more and more your primary identity is yourself as the universe. I, as Kent calls it.
Yep.
And I'm the universe waking up through you, through Keith, through Zoe. And then you're observing your attachments and your associations and your constructive and destructive shadow with interest.
Yep.
From a different place, from a more eternal, absolute truth place. And those are blissful moments.
Yeah.
People have those and they go, yum.
Right. The other thing,
I have a couple of clients who are taking mushrooms this weekend. And I told them they're doing it with a guide, they're doing it right. And I told them what I tell everybody who takes psychedelics. I go, at some point in this process, you're going to feel a sense of unity with absolutely everything that's ever existed and that exists and that will exist. And when that happens, I want you to remember that's not just the drug.
right.
That our consciousness to survive had to block out that understanding that we've had from conception onward. And if you scramble your consciousness enough, that understanding will emerge. So you were going to say something. I interrupted. I'm sorry.
No, interrupt me anytime you want, buddy. I was just going to say, the other thing that that's sort of coming up for me is another reason why doing the practice is so important is because, we live in an era today here in 2020, fully immersed in social media as we are, fully immersed in sort of the attention economy, where we are paying far more attention to our identity than any other time in any other historical era, right? Identity is at the forefront of our awareness these days. And society is sort of, kind of figuring out how to move forward with this sort of new layer that's being added. And I think one of the problems with that is in this kind of attention economy, one of the ways that we gain social credit is by driving as hard as we can against these things that we perceive as cultural shadows, right? And we even get sort of this kind of arrogant self-righteousness when we start kind of, following that pattern, because we think we are cultural warriors who are calling out these dark patches of our society and trying to bring more light to it and all that. However, if you're not practiced, right? If you don't have sort of the intrapersonal, not interpersonal, but intrapersonal capacity to actually look at your own experience, look at, your own pattern making, your own meaning making, and your own ability to generate and manufacture and project shadows at every moment, then what you're basically doing is you're self-righteously attacking other people's shadows and replacing them with your own.
That's
which
right.
is a common criticism I see of the white fragility work, for example. We've had a couple conversations where it's like, there's some really important ideas in here that need to be transcluded and uplifted and reintegrated and all that. But there's other aspects of this where it's just like you're exchanging one shadow, one set of biases for another set of biases that you think are more true than the shadows you're going after.
Yeah, better bias.
That gets really, really difficult and confusing and challenging because it's hard to find someone who has that proper sense of proportionality, right? Where we can say, here's kind of how all these things can stack into each other. Here's the healthy bits that you want to preserve. Here's the unhealthy bits that you kind of want to throw out the window. And it gets really challenging.
Absolutely.
I remember I asked you a question that kind of went along that. Remember a while back, I asked you a question, like I was feeling really frustrated after Kamala Harris, it was announced that she was going to be on the ticket. And, I went on my social media and it was split exactly down the center. Half of them were furious and were like, he is just the devil incarnate. And then the other half were like, this is the best thing since ever. And like, this is just going to be the saving grace to our country, and I would read both sets of comments and I'd be like, well, that makes a lot of sense, and then I'd be like, well, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
And it stressed me out because I was like, how can the fact that I can see truth in both and they are at odds,
How do I reconcile that? Yeah.
Yeah. I called my dad and, he had some good advice. He was like, that's great. It's good that you can see,
Yeah.
And things can be at odds and still, I love that. I think that like Eckhart Tolle says that truth is paradox. And I've found a lot of, that means a lot to, that idea means a lot to me, because it means that you don't have to know.
Right.
And we kind of talked about this a little bit last night, is sometimes that the highest wisdom is being able to say, I don't know.
Right.
And to mean it.
Oh, we need to talk about that with yeah, mean it right, because I know everything, right? That's one of my problems. And
Yeah,
what you're describing is what Bina says is her polarity work, and organizes her polarity work around being comfortable around different points of view and holding them until something emerges. There's a couple of questions.
Yeah, we got a bunch of comments here. So first, Claire asks, can you please share your meditation method and practice? Briefly, do you find that you do the 3-2-1 practice after meditation or before?
I do that practice all the time.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that any reaction, it's Ken in the myth and the given, right?
Mm-hmm.
We invest ourselves in everything that we perceive and relate with. And so I'm always doing that practice. I'm assuming that any reaction I have to anybody has to do with some projection of me, and I'm kind of curious about it. If I'm socially attuned, if we're in a groove, my reactions will guide me with us. In psychotherapy, my reactions will guide me to the material that my clients need, which I'm beginning to answer another question that was asked. And so what the meditation has done is help cultivate and strengthen the compassionate witness in me so that I can do the 3-2-1 and the 1-2-3-1 process pretty much all the time. Now, for me, I notice when I'm not doing it. If I get caught up in some destructive shadow and I'm not regulating it, I'm not exploring it, I'm kind of curious. How come I'm not doing that? That's interesting.
Right.
I mean,
yeah. It's a question we often get, Keith. I often see this question, particularly when it comes to shadow practice. How often should I be doing this? How long should I be doing it for? Should I be doing it once a day or twice a day or 5 times a day? And, my answer is often like, well, it's kind of like meditation, right? You do it explicitly until you find that you're kind of always doing it implicitly. It becomes just sort of, you internalize this process, and, and before you know it, it becomes almost part of this filter that you're enacting reality through. Everything kind of comes through that shadow filter with enough practice. And once that comes online in a sort of a fuller way.
And your emotions guide you.
Right.
There's a sense of distress, little anxiety, any tension, any of that stuff, that will guide you. There's a hook somewhere, and so you get curious about the hook. And things don't necessarily have to be resolved, but if you observe something and accept it with interest, your unconscious is in the process of resolving it at that point. And it'll resolve it when it resolves it. I get very, very crabby before I have a breakthrough insight, particularly on a project. I get depressed, I kind of feel useless and stupid, and I know it's going to happen. I know that I'm going to have a download in the next 48 hours probably. And so I do the practices that I do to support that. And sure enough, it shows up most of the time. And so now I know what that particular feeling is. I'm not worried about what if I lost all my creative juices. No, that's the feeling that I have before that particular download. And so as you begin to understand your own psychology, you can begin to navigate even a little bit better through the world. And then you do that in your relationships. Is there some kind of little thing that I have with you?
Right.
So I wonder what that's associated with. And it'll be associated with all kinds of, this is one of the reasons I like working with couples. Like about 30 or 40% of my practices, maybe 30% is couples. Because about 30% of my practice is couples. And families, mostly couples. That couples are so tuned into each other that they're constantly generating this stuff. And if they just start getting interested in it and collaborative in it, they start having fun with it rather than hurting each other with it. And, if you want to be a couple doing better, you need to be having more fun. Right. and you need to be having more fun with your own personal evolution, because if not, you're not paying much attention to your own personal evolution. And as we all have discovered, that can cause problems.
That's right. Keith, you mentioned something that, I actually think maybe we want to devote a show to, which is how uncomfortable creativity actually can be. Because
Okay.
I think we've internalized this sort of conception of creativity where it's like, this just moves through you and it's freely, it spontaneously manifests and it feels good when it happens. It's like, that's not my experience,
Need to be in a flow state all day long. Just
you know?
Dancing around, right?
There are aspects of the creative process that are downright not just uncomfortable, but painful sometimes. I mean, Ken describes this pretty well with his, people get frustrated with Ken because he describes his creative process almost like an alien receiving a transmission from another galaxy. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
he has it like Mozart had it. He just gets it all at once.
Downloads, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? But you can actually see, and he's talked about before, how it messes with his nervous system. Like,
Oh, yeah.
it feels like there's too much voltage, you know what I mean, for his nervous system to actually handle. It's uncomfortable, it's painful, it's not, and I feel similarly when I want to do something new, I want to create something new, and I know there's a space that I need to, sort of form myself into and adapt myself to, and it's painful adjusting and getting into that space and remaining in that space for an extended amount of time. It's like it
Can be.
burns calories, and it's it's a
Oh,
little
yeah. I remember when I was writing my doctoral dissertation, I told Becky, it's hard to work on this and love you at the same time. And she's not a particularly assertive person, particularly in those days. And she said, she responded instantaneously. She said, how long are you going to work on your dissertation? I said, 2 more years. She said, then you're going to have to change that.
Oh,
I mean, it was
Mama.
like, and so I realized, I discovered I could do 5 hours of that work, maybe 6, and then have something left. Now, by the way, this reminds me, those of you that are listening probably listen to Jeff Salzman and I do Shrink and Pundit.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, Jeff Salzman and I are writing a book called the Shrink and the Pundit book.
Amazing.
Titled The Endless Conversation. And I'm very interested if there's any favorite episodes that you guys have, or something that you especially want Jeff and me to include in the book, or if you have an idea about what would make that book great, go on my website and email it to me, okay? I'm trying to get some synoptic empiricism around this. I want to have a project that arises not just from me, but from Jeff and me and other people. And I'm putting out that call. If there's any of those episodes that you'd like, or any particular part of it that you'd like, or any particular form, I've already gotten some wonderful feedback from some other people. I just want to put that out.
Keith, how many more books do you need, man? How many books do you already? This will be like your 27th book. Like, save some paper for the rest of us, man.
Yeah, I'm like Ken. If there's a book that needs to come through me, I go, okay.
100%.
I say yes.
Yep. Let's get to some more other comments. I do want to come back to something that you mentioned earlier. Maybe we'll do this towards the end of the show, when you were talking about how heady and cognitive integral can be. I want to double click that a little bit later, because
Sure.
It's an important point. So Simon says, I'm completing an undergrad in applied psychology, and I don't feel well equipped to work as a psychotherapist. Aside from what was discussed today, which I appreciate, I'm curious to know, what are the therapeutic modalities Dr. Witt believes in, and why, as well as the personal development he thinks is necessary. If he feels like talking about this, I'm curious, because he is already to some degree.
Simon, right?
Yep.
So first of all, Simon, I pretty much like all psychotherapeutic modalities. And also, you're not prepared after an undergraduate degree in applied psychology to be a therapist, which is fine. But you've taken huge steps in that direction. So what do? There was a meta-analysis that was done on what explained the positive variance in psychotherapy. And so this meta-analysis came up with some interesting findings. One is that psychotherapy actually helps people, quite a relief to all of us. And I've mentioned this study before. The second one said that of the variance of a positive, what explains positive change, 40% of it was client variables. Their relationships, their ability to regulate their emotions, their resources, how well they took care of themselves. 30% of it was the relationship with the therapist. Did they have a good alliance? 15% of it was placebo effect. If you believe that your therapy helps and your clients believe therapy helps, it's going to help some. 15% of it was method of treatment. That's a sixth. Now that's significant, but it's not huge. So to answer your question, one, learn how to create a therapeutic relationship where someone feels understood and accepted by you. And secondly, continue to do your personal work of personal development, and not just in terms of your own awareness, in your relationships, in the way you manage your health, you and substances, you and your family. Every single area is important. So you don't have to be great in those areas, but you need to have an attitude of, I want to continue to grow in those areas. Thirdly, to study the systems that excite you. And fourthly, do the work. Get involved in volunteer or paraprofessional programs and help people by being there for them and understanding them and accepting them, and then being supervised by experienced senior therapists to help you grow. There's a reason that they require 3,000 hours of supervised experience to get your first license. And so you do that, and what's going to happen is you're going to develop your own unique natural healing style that will draw from the ones that you've studied. It will have commonalities with the therapeutic relationship, the alliance, the ethics, and so on, but will be a unique expression of your personality through this medium. And that's how it works with all therapists. And there are a million different psychotherapeutic styles in the United States, because there's a million different therapists in the United States. And we have certain things in common, the ones that I've mentioned, but generally that's the way to go. And go that way. And if you're interested in you want to know more about my approach, read my books, particularly Waking Up, which is a textbook on integrally informed psychotherapy, and its companion volume, Sessions, which follows a guy who cheated on his wife and his kids and his lover and his wife for a year after she discovered that he was cheating on her. I have a special place in my heart for that book. Of course, all my clients, kind of compete to see, you're writing about me. And I go, no, I have carefully combined billions of people together. It's not any particular person.
Or do they not want you to write about that?
The problem with having to come up with stories like that is none of the stories I make up are as bizarre or interesting as the real stories. Because you just can't make that stuff up.
Welcome to 2020.
And welcome to 2020. So there you go, Simon. That's my short answer. And the long answer goes on forever.
We'll do another episode about it.
Yeah.
Oh, well said. Thank you, Keith. Eric's got his hand raised. Eric, I'm bringing you on over. There we go. Just hit the unmute button.
Okay, unmuted.
Hey, Eric. And then if you have a
hear
video
me?
camera, you can turn that on if you want.
Yeah, I'll be give it a try here.
There we go. Good to see you.
Okay. Hey, good to be with you. And I'm nervous, so let me just own that right off the bat.
Sure.
Yes, I feel a lot.
Man. I'm
and
nervous
so-
every time.
Yeah. So hoping something good comes out of this in terms of me being more skillful in the way I approach the world. So shadow stuff, what's coming up for me right now is like, I'm trying to figure out how to constructively relate to QAnon, kind of like coming to my town. So I live in a small town in southwestern Montana. One of the people on the main street has their building, and it's all painted up with QAnon themes, the storm coming, Great Awakening, and sheep with the mask on, and all this other kind of stuff. And yeah, I feel a lot of distress, and it brings it closer to home. I mean, I follow current events a lot, and tracking conspiracy theories and all of that stuff. But here it is on the main street, and I look in the window of the shop, and like here's a picture of the black poster with the two AR-15s crossed, and there's a lot of violent themes in that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in southwestern Montana. I'm used to gun culture. I'm generally comfortable, but this whole sense of our country heading towards maybe, some very serious civil unrest, and me having a sense of people that this could turn really violent. I think, where our country's heading, at least in the United States here, talking with our location, it's like, this can get really edgy. And I feel how that activates stuff in me. and I'm thinking like, where do I have a constructive response to this that isn't just projecting my shadow? And like you said before, it's like I see somebody else's shadow, and so then I'm going to go and replace their shadow with my shadow. It's like that's not a good strategy. So what's the wise, compassionate way for me to deal with that?
Such a great question. Thank you, Eric.
Well, first of all, it's really nice to know that you're in that town too, Eric. That town is not just that store. That town is that store, and Eric's in that town also. And also, it reflects a strategic decision that's been going on forever. You know, in general, the Republicans tell vile lies about Democrats, and Democrats tell embarrassing truths about Republicans. And then often the
I bet you just pissed off a few watchers.
okay. And often the news media will equate those two things, and they're not. They're different kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and what you said about violence, that's already happening. That 17-year-old with his gun, you know, driving and killing. Yeah, that's happening. And so, what do we do with it? Well, first of all, spiral dynamics is really great. If you have a conformist consciousness, remember we can have a conformist consciousness on one line of development. We can have a rational consciousness on another line of development, and even a so there's a shift. That's why psychographs are a little bit more accurate. Conformist consciousness does not respond to facts, and it has no cognitive dissonance. Okay? And so, what do you do about that? Probably, if you talk to any one of those, not anyone, most of the QAnon people, and had a conversation not about QAnon, but about anything else, they'd probably talk to you like a regular person talks. Okay. If you had a flat tire outside their house, they probably wouldn't shoot you. They'd probably help you with a flat tire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So cultivating a sense of compassion and understanding for they like the lies on the internet spread 3 times faster than truth. People like salacious stuff. They're drawn to it and they like sharing it. And people like to believe horrible stuff about people they don't like. Okay, they don't want to believe good stuff. And so for me, I'm concerned like you, but I want to have compassion and understanding. Those guys happen to be in a country where they can do that and not get in a lot of trouble. Okay, it's a free country. That's the First Amendment thing. How can we affect them? One, not fight with them, because fighting with them is useless. Not argue with them necessarily. If I'm going to talk to a conservative, I don't share my ideas much. I ask them about their ideas. I try to find something that I can agree with. One thing I agree with the QAnon people, pedophilia and cannibalism is a bad thing. We all agree on that. Really, it's really true. Okay. And in terms of social change, the social change that I can do to affect them is 1, help their children get better educations, and 2, try to elect people that'll take care of those guys, because those are the people that are being screwed the most by the last 20 years of government in this country. And they might not appreciate it, but I know that that's happening. And so that attitude protects me from getting lost in outrage. Because when I'm lost in outrage, I've climbed into that arena. And we're always going to lose in the outraged arena. I'm going. So my daughter wants to say something.
I have a couple thoughts as well. What I try to do is I think about a belief that I have, maybe about the world or about myself, that I feel deeply emotionally invested in. And I think about what it would take for me to change that belief. And usually, if it's something that's really deeply, deeply there, then I'm like, it would take more force than exists in the universe. Like that belief is there. So I try to kind of like just figure that. I imagine them feeling the same way about that belief. Like I look at that belief and I find it repugnant, but they're looking at that belief and they're saying I'm a force for good and morality and righteousness and virtue and all this kind of stuff. So I try to take out the words of the belief and go down to the frequency of the belief itself. And I'm like, I understand that. I resonate with that, with being really stuck in a belief, So that helps me have a little bit more compassion for like that.
So you're saying your core beliefs have never been shaken from a really good internet argument? You've never just totally reevaluated your views and your values and
Well, you know, I saw this one meme on the internet. It had like, I don't know. Oh, right. It had, was that serial killer Ted Bundy on it? You know, and that changed my belief. No, it's never happened. It's never happened, and I don't see it happening.
and it probably never will. Yeah, no, that's
And also one last thing to Eric. I like it that you're talking to us. I mean, you know, the three jewels, remember, one of them of Buddhism, one of them was Sangha. You really need to be able to talk to someone who can see the world the way you see it.
Yeah.
And you know, you notice what you're looking for. You want a better understanding. And you want an understanding that can liberate you somewhat from the reaction that you have and the alarm that you have about this stuff. And I'm alarmed too, by the way. And I'm reacting to, and it's not that I'm not outraged, but I do my best to have the outrage lead me to deeper understanding and some kind of right action. And I'm glad you're bringing this thing up. And, you know, we have things to do. So we're all doing what we're supposed to do. Right, Eric?
Yeah. And I think the point that you're making about, you know, the frequency underneath feels really important to me, because I'm looking at, you know, like what's a commonality here is there's fear. There's a lot of, you know, potential chaos, not sure where things are going. And so, you know, there's probably a lot of fear that's driving that kind of thing. And then there's fear in me that's driving, you know, and then it's the counter reaction to that. And the thing about it is like these different spheres of life, because, you know, I've lived here for 40 some years, right? These are, you know, folks that if I'm driving down the road and have a flat tire, you know, they're going to stop and help me, or I'm going to stop and help them. And it's like, there's a community. And so I feel like, you know, around, you know, regular folks who have a conservative perspective, I don't have a problem with that. I feel really integrated in my community, but it's this other place goes into this hole of, you know, really deep, dark stuff that's where I feel the reactionary thing coming up in me, and then just kind of getting to where I can metabolize that. And
well, and also that's wisdom.
Yeah.
There's violence there. You know, that's true. You know, there's danger there. You know, so you're feeling real violence and real danger. Good people can do horrible things if they're caught up in, and they have the wrong kind of leader. They're caught up in a distorted belief system, and they're driven by, you know, fear and rage. And so, you know, there's a part of you that has a genuine fear that these good people can somehow fall into a trap where they do horrible things.
Well, and it sounds like everyone is inviting us, both wits on the call are inviting us to basically begin to discern between someone's views, which can be, there are a lot of broken views out there, versus someone's values that are animating those views and are sort of located. You got to dig through the view in order to find the value. And 9 times out of 10, if we take the time to do our digging, we will come to a space of values alignment. There's some piece of your own value stack that resonates exactly with where they are coming from. You have a radically different view because you also know that, you know, there's a lot of propaganda out there and distorted sort of data, and there's all sorts of you know, billionaires who are competing to sort of infect our informational terrain, right? So we know that's out there, and it's okay to sort of negate those kinds of views as long as we're also doing the work to include the values that are sort of underlying all of them. Because again, Keith, as you said, none of us condone pedophilia. Pedophilia is
or cannibalism,
right? Or cannibalism.
Don't forget cannibalism.
But we're also aware. We're also I mean, it's kind of funny, right? Because you say the word and we kind of, you know, erupt in laughter because something like pedophilia is one of these terms that completely bypasses our frontal cortex, lands right in the amygdala, and then ramps everything up, right? Ramps everything because there's nothing more sinister or evil a person can be accused of, right? That's like the bottom of the barrel. So as soon as someone is accused of that, there's a part of you that sort of automatically believes it in a kind
of way. Sliming. Somebody has been slimed.
Yeah.
Now, it's great that we all hate pedophilia. Okay. I'm glad that it has that. But, you know, again, vile lies slime people.
That's right.
So thank you, Eric. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're a little less anxious at this moment.
Yeah, getting there.
Okay, good. Thanks for joining.
Well, and the other, the other kind of small piece here is, Keith, we've often used this metaphor that sometimes when you're reacting to someone because you think they're being an asshole, you do your 3-2-1 work, you reclaim everything you need to reclaim back from that person. And at the end of the day, that person is still kind of an asshole, right? You can do all the shadow work you want. It doesn't change the fact that a person might be behaving in a particular way. What you're changing is your capacity to respond to that and your capacity to get affected by it rather than being able to kind of manage and regulate it.
Well, if you do the work, it's not that they're an asshole. It's that they're doing something that you find destructive or morally objectionable. And they might have enough of a wounded psychology that that's just their modus operandi.
Yeah.
And those people are super dangerous.
It's super important.
Yeah. That's way different than dismissing that person as an asshole. I'm more comfortable in the second framework and less comfortable in the first framework because anytime I'm dismissing someone in a black and white fashion, I'm missing something.
Right.
And particularly when I'm upset, I don't want to miss anything.
When being an asshole so often is a protective mechanism. I know like the times that, the many times in my life that I've been an asshole, it's because I'm trying to protect myself. I feel threatened. And so I'm trying to put up a barrier, it's not even really about the person. It's about me cocooning myself, so.
Back to 3-2-1.
Back to 3-2-1. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. It's one of those things where someone's being an asshole. It's like, I don't judge you for your wounds, right? And the way that you're coping with your wounds, but I judge you for like your lack of regulation.
Yes.
Right.
There you go.
Like I can go, okay, you're an asshole today because you had these childhood traumas and that affected you and da da da. But I'm still going to hold you accountable for how you present yourself in public, Donald Trump.
Because that's the individual's responsibility. Like that's what life is about, is taking responsibility.
It's no one else's responsibility to clean up your psychological wounds. That's 100%. I'm going to bring Nat on over, who let me just say, before Nat comes over, he left a couple comments. The first one was, "I love mushrooms," and the other one was, "Police took my LSD." So I think this is going to be a fun conversation. Come on over, Nat.
So sorry about whoever got lost their LSD.
I know, that sucks.
Sucks when that happens.
Nat, how are you?
Hey, Nat.
Let's get you unmuted. You'll have to do that yourself and maybe turn on your video if you can.
I can see him.
I can see the picture.
Oh, I haven't got a video?
There should be a button you can click to turn on your video.
Cool. First time using Zoom. Hey guys. Those comments there were it amuses me. Like, like you're talking about shadow, and it's like, yeah, that's a place I've got a bit. And what I wanted to comment on is just something that I've really liked about today, and something that I haven't seen in your conversations before, is it's Keith and Zoe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, having those two on the screen together is just so beautiful. It's really amazing. And a part of what I really like about it is just the like when I was watching Keith talking and then seeing Zoe thinking about what was going on. Like, was she accessing, like running through what he was saying, when he was describing the 3-2-1 process, and was talking about like guilt or something, and then watching the facial expressions like going like down and then up, and like this roller coaster of emotion. And I think that's just something that I'd love to see that more. If you've got opportunity to do that, like it's just something I've really liked.
Great.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Thank you.
That's lovely to hear.
Yeah.
Lack of filter I get from I'm not really good at hiding
Yeah, I'm not a real filtered person when it comes to being transparent.
Well,
My daughter is very similar.
I'm glad to hear it's appreciated by someone. Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Nat.
yeah.
That's a very sweet thing to say. I really appreciate it.
It's how you can tell there's an authentic relationship there, because you can watch these like feedback loops in real time. You know what I mean? The emotional states kind of go up and down, and it's awesome to watch.
Yes, exactly, yeah. So yeah, cool. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Nat.
Thank you, Nat.
Come back and see us anytime, my friend. Let's see here. Do we have any other questions? Carolyn Winter asks a question.
Carolyn.
This resonates with a question in our YouTube stream. So Carolyn asks, I would find it helpful if you could do a few more practical examples. I think she's talking about the 1, 2, 3, 1 process. Say a negative opinion about something Trump said, or QAnon, or judgment of the behavior of a certain team members at work, for example. Thanks, Carolyn.
Okay.
Can we invent a problem and
well, no, I think
You want to do the Trump thing about the veteran?
I was going to suggest that. Was it losers and suckers? Assuming that's true. Okay.
So first of all, just to answer Carolyn's, ultimately, we want to resolve issues through social engagement, through relating. And if there's a problem with somebody, if possible, I want to relate my way through it. To do that, I have to see them as a worthwhile person with their own issues. So that's the 3, 2, 1. I'm mad at somebody at work because they're doing a bad thing or they did something I don't like. I go, God damn them. And now I'm mad at them. And I go, so Keith, you're pretty mad at them about that. Yeah, I am. And they're this person. I go, okay, so I'm now categorizing their whole character because of this thing they did with me or this habit they don't like. So I go, yeah, they're a more complex person than that. And obviously there's some part of you that's pretty hurt about this or pretty pissed about this. What's that about? Well, I want more connection, more authority, more recognition, more something. And then now we come to the question. Okay, so, and I see them as a threat because I'm not just feeling a little bit of upset, I'm feeling a lot of upset. So as I'm noticing that, I'm owning the projection, I'm feeling more of a measured response, but I still don't like what they're doing. Either I can relate with them, or I can talk to them about what's going on, or I can't. And if I can't, if they're just going to get caught up in being defended and not be able to relate productively, then I have to handle them. And handling is setting boundaries. Handling is building alliances. Handling is arranging circumstances so that inequities or problems are addressed on a systemic level. Handling is going to the supervisor and saying, could you help us with this? We're disagreeing. And so from a practical standpoint, once you get to the point that this is a person that has their own perspective, like the QAnon people. Okay, I'm not going to go talk about the QAnon people about this is part of basically a larger structure of wanting to have a certain group stay in power where they can't stay in power on their merits, so they have to stay in power by manipulating emotions and thoughts. I can't have that conversation. Okay, so what kind of conversation are you gonna have? Well, I can be kind, I can listen to them, I can let them know I'm a progressive who's not gonna dismiss them. And I can be really supportive of them having social resources, their kids having great schools, us having a good town, us being able to be like Eric was talking about, he's been there 40 years. We can all be in this town together and respect each other if we have different opinions. So it's like that. And if he wants to change something about, say, people carrying AK-47s around because they can, you're going to have to talk on a systemic level and handle that.
Right.
There has to be some kind of external constraint.
Right.
And that's a problem with this country. It's an underregulated country in many ways.
Yeah.
That underregulation is what's causing a lot of the problems.
I have a question / comment about that, if that's okay.
Sure, you're on the show. You can do whatever you want.
Okay. What you're talking about with the example with the coworker, I would imagine that if it's someone that you have to handle where you don't feel like you can engage with them, that I feel like it would be easy to slip into the kind of holier than thou trap. which then immediately just shifts you back into the sort of the projection shadow kind of mode. So like, I feel like, you know, you can say like, okay, this person, you know, I'm never going to be able to relate with them. They just, you know, they have their victim thing or they have their aggression thing or whatever. Okay, well then I guess I'll just have to handle them, you know, and then it's easy to get into this kind of thing of like moral superiority, right? Like, oh, I'm handling this lesser being, you know? So like, I feel like it's necessary to handle someone, but I was wondering if you have any thoughts on like how to just kind of self-regulate to the point where you don't slip into that trap, you know?
So this is what you and I were talking about with integral. This is a transition point, okay? So one of your irritations with integral is a know-it-all kind of thing, right?
Yeah, for me, so I think that there's so much wisdom in integral, but I always feel a little uncomfortable talking about it because it's sort of this feeling of like anything I say, integral is going to pop up and be like, I have an answer for that, you know, I have an answer for that. And so like I've been drawn over the years to wisdom practices such as like the work of Byron Katie and Eckhart Tolle, and like the reason why I'm so interested in them is there's this like there's both this radical acceptance of the human experience, the not imposing one's own experience onto someone else, and there's this ability to say I don't know, you know. Like Eckhart Tolle talks about the Dalai Lama a little bit, and he makes the point of saying that the Dalai Lama will say I have no idea, you know, like so I ask a question he won't know and he'll be like I don't know.
Humility.
And I think that that's really a sign of wisdom. And so that is an issue that I've had with integral. Again, I'm like slightly uncomfortable bringing it up because I'm like, integral is just going to come up and be like, well, I know what's up with that, you know.
No way. I'm going to show you 15 separate diagrams why you're wrong.
To answer your question.
That's right.
Yes, and explain everything that you just said.
No,
So I have a response to that.
Yeah, me too. You first.
Let's hear it.
Well, first of all, integral is a meta theory, which is different than a theory. But I think that you can use the integral to contextualize everything, okay? So integral doesn't know everything, but integral has an opinion about everything because the meta theory contextualizes any experience.
Does it allow for the opinions to be wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And now we're going to, am I contextualizing it?
We would say partial. We would say partial, not wrong.
Partial, okay.
Yeah.
Am I contextualizing so that I'm avoiding being influenced? Or am I contextualizing so that I can expand my understanding and be influenced? And when integral is being used to contextualize so that I don't have to be influenced by your process or by your idea, then I think you're falling into I think that's not just arrogant. I think what that does is a resistance of personal evolution, and it's a problem. And it's easy to do with integral because integral has something to say about absolutely everything. And so what I pay attention to is, am I using my integral understanding to resist influence from this idea or to be influenced? And if I'm using it to resist influence, I get suspicious. And so that's the way that I deal with that. And that's a common critique of integral. I mean, Zoe was in a one-year program of California Institute of Integral Studies and then dropped out. She decided she didn't want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few reasons, but.
Well, one reason is that integral didn't just light you up like a firecracker.
Yeah, and I kind of would going back to, that's a great answer, by the way. I love that.
Thank you.
And
Boy, I should have you on the show where I'm
less willing to critique you when I'm in front of people.
Yeah, I like it.
But it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. So now I lost my train of thought. I'm like, oh no, do I need to argue with you more?
No. I don't know if the dialectic is not an argument. Dialectic is we're going back and forth influencing each other.
I like that answer because I like it when you admit that you're wrong. I get a lot of pleasure out of that.
Yeah, as every kid
for
does.
a lot of years of not doing that, so I love it.
I predict confidently that you're going to have that pleasurable experience many times in your life.
Well,
yeah.
just a couple kind of reflections. Because I think what you're saying, Zoe, is sort of I relate to it as half true and half not. So I'll start with the half not. So I think that there's a big aspect of this criticism, which we do see often, which comes from the fact that oftentimes integral is itself sitting in a shadow of a really, really rich legacy of anti-intellectualism that exists both in American culture broadly, but especially in spiritual communities, where the whole idea of spiritual communities is supposed to like you're supposed to like kill your mind, kill your ego, and just transcend, and all the mental stuff is just a distraction, and so forth. So I think that there's an aspect of integral that really activates people's anti-intellectual shadows. Maybe they feel like, well, I don't just intuitively understand this, so it must be wrong, right? There's kind of that aspect to it. There's another aspect to it in which you are 100% completely true. I would say that most people's enactment of integral in their own lives is largely neck up, right? And that's true, I think, for multiple reasons. A, because there's so much cognitive stuff with it, right? I mean, Ken and all of it, Ken's got books that are just like, this thick, and he's got like, almost as many of them as Keith does. And, and they're dense and they're heavy and they're not always very accessible to people. And I think that, can create some kind of tension there. But it also makes it so that people are spending years, even decades, just kind of consuming these intellectual maps, right? Without necessarily ever turning around and facing the territory. And I think our audience is a mix of people who are all over that spectrum. We have some very, very deeply embodied, integral practitioners who can, inhabit like you wouldn't believe, right? You can just drop down and kind of transmit that way. And then there's other people who I think are still kind of in the early phases where this is mostly a head trip, and we're trying to figure out ways to allow it to kind of trickle down into the rest of our being. The nice thing is that is itself part of the map. You know what I mean? Ken reminds us in every book, for example, everything you're about to read is a lie, right? And the really real truth is the practices that are required in order to bring this data up in the first place. And if you don't believe me, then do the practices, make your own observations, and then check it with other people who've done the same. Chances are, in the long run, you'll end up agreeing with me more than not. So I think that's true. And it's something that we here at Integral Life are trying to find ways to respond to, because I think a big reason for why integral can be so disembodied for so many people is because look at the medium it's taking place on. Integral has been unfolding over the last 15 years on this postmodern flat social media platform, right? Which has no what I call an enfoldment mechanism. There's nowhere in this media platform that says this truth is a little bit more true than this truth. Everything is just kind of thrown against the wall, and certain things stick for some people and other things stick for other people, and it's very flat. And this is the platform that integral is kind of finding its traction in, and emerging through. And I think what this does is this actually sort of creates these feedback loops that allow us to remain kind of trapped in our heads, because that's how we interact with each other when we're online. We don't have these kinds of feedbacks with each other where I can say something, I can see how your face changes, and then, you know what I mean? That deepens the conversation, that deepens the embodiment. Instead, it's just words being thrown at other words, and everything remains abstract and cognitive. So what we at Integral Life are trying to do about this is we are now in the process of bringing online a live practice platform. We're already doing, I think, about 2 live practices a week. And the idea here is to actually get people together in real time where we can drop some of this jargon, some of these, kind of cognitive pieces, and come into a practiced relationship, a real-time practiced relationship with each other in a safe and conscious container that allows us to actually do the work that allows this stuff to emerge cognitively in the first place. And I think in the long run, this more than anything is going to help shift how we relate with each other, how we relate with ourselves, how heady and cognitive integral is versus our actual lived experience and our capacity to do the work and show up as fully as we can in our lives and our relationships and so forth. This, to me, this practice piece that we're beginning to bring online feels like a new integral renaissance that I think is poised to directly meet the sorts of very true criticisms that you're kind of bringing into the conversation. So I'm excited for that, and I'm just very grateful that you brought this topic into this conversation, because it's an important one.
Yeah.
Did that help? Or is that too heady?
No, I appreciate your answer. I could feel my emotional kind of roller coaster. Like it was kind of going from like there's this feeling of integral does mirror in a lot of ways my own personal practice, which is again more aligned with sort of the no thought thing that you were talking about before. And for me, it's not no thought for no thought's sake. I mean, I've always been an extremely mental person. And so I think the reason why integral has been a turnoff for me, and I'm historically, is because I was trying to approach it from the head down, right? And so what ultimately kind of allowed my palate to be cleansed, so to speak, is like this idea that like I was trying to, like, my mind is so dysfunctional in so many ways that it felt like trying to solve my problems on the same frequency that they had been created on, and it felt like integral to me, felt like kind of a match. Like, okay, we're going to figure this out. We're going to explain everything. And so I like a lot how you talk about it, embodiment practices, because that resonates with my own ideas about how, I mean, in my worldview, when you are able to clear your mind, that's when true inspiration comes, right? Like they say that Einstein had long periods of time with no thought, and so like, ultimately, I feel like that's really where the answer is. And so I appreciate you saying that, because it makes me feel like there's more parallels between integral and what, my own thoughts and beliefs are. And I still have some issues with it, but I appreciate the information. And I really like the people that I've met that are involved in it, and so I love this. I mean, I love hearing about it, so thank you for that answer.
Yeah, totally. Well, and just to say, there's in my experience, there's a couple different kinds of integral. There's a lot of different kinds of integral people out there, but two of the broad categories I put them in are like people who know Ken's stuff in and out, and they're like, I'm a self-identified integralist, right? And that's a big part of our audience. Obviously, those are the people who I work for in doing the shows and try to get it out there. And there's also the people who are just sort of intuitively there without ever having heard of Ken Wilber or Keith Witt or any of these personalities that we have on the site. They're just someone who is so obviously stably there. They're kind of already in the territory, right? They're not trying to find their way to the territory using this map. They're kind of already there. And maybe later on, they'll start looking for a map that, can help them make a little bit of sense. Oh, that's what that landmark is. Oh, that's the direction I'm heading in. That's all cool. But the most important thing is, how there are you, and how capable are you of expressing not the views of integral, but the values and the connective tissue that ties us all together. And just talking with you, I get that sense that you're one of those people who, like, you're, in terms of like your general altitude, you're already there. And maybe these cognitive pieces aren't very valuable to you right now. They might be down the line after, let's say, hey, I've got these like 6 or 7 practices, and they're really, I'm getting a lot of fruit from this. I'm getting a lot of sort of rocket fuel from this. Now I want to figure out how, how do these kind of fit together in a more kind of coherent, that's maybe where some integral, theory stuff can start to kick in. But if that's not, I think there's a typological aspect to this too, where like, I'm a, more masculine Enneagram type 4, which has its own kind of preferences.
Wait,
and its own.
You're a 4?
Zoe's a 4 too.
I'm a 4.
You know that we are the rarest and most unique of the Enneagram types.
Yes, we are. We are like no one else, and no one else can understand us.
Ever. Yeah, but we can maybe understand each other,
Yeah.
kind of.
A little bit.
I agree with you, Corey. And all along, Ken said I'm a map maker.
Yeah.
And what is he mapping out? The next wave of evolutionary wave is the integral wave. And there are other people like Carl, I forget his last name, the guy who wrote the 9th wave. There's other waves beyond that, but it's something that's happening that we understand in the way that we understand it. But you're right. More often than not, when people are at teal altitude, they've never heard of integral. Some have. So I think it's part of something that's a larger process that's happening in the evolution of consciousness.
Yeah, and like it'll happen or it won't, and I think that's something about radical acceptance that I really like, is like, I believe that is the direction that the universe is going. If it doesn't end up going through humans, then it'll go through something else or somewhere else or whatever, and that's okay. But like, I think that just yeah, I agree. I agree. I like it. Yeah.
I would invite you, if you're interested at all in sort of like, getting some more of that integral experience, but without the jargon, without the quadrants and levels and lines and all of that, all those ideas. You just want to drop that out and have an integral experience. Come participate with some of these practices that we're doing every week. They're powerful. You won't hear a single mention of a quadrant anywhere in that session, right? And what you'll really find is
not even the upper left and the lower left. Come on.
there might be some, a couple. It might be okay. Maybe there'll be a mention or two, but it's not the emphasis of the practice. And Keith, I love that this also brings me back to just the topic of the conversation today, which is again shadow, and some of the shadows that exist within integral. One of which is both hyper intellectualization on one side and anti-intellectualism on the other. And I think integral kind of stands in both of those shadows. And tie it back to the QAnon piece, because I also have shadow issues around this. And it's not so much around the fact that QAnon exists. Like, I could have almost predicted QAnon would have, something like it would. I mean, it's that old George Carlin line, right? Like, imagine how dumb the average person is. Now remember that half the people are even dumber. It's, that George Carlin classic. And so it's, I'm perfectly.
And that's a little bit of a superior comment.
Well, that's George Carlin, and he was superior in a lot of ways.
And everyone has an iPhone and thumbs.
The idea being, you can have a sense of just like, there's a bell curve here, and not everyone is going to be basking in glorious integral consciousness. People are going to put together their sense of meaning making according to whatever makes sense for them at their level, whatever has the most explanatory power. So what triggers me is not the fact that QAnon exists. What triggers me, and then I have to do my work, is when self-identified integral people get interested in QAnon. Because for me, integral does not tell you what you should believe. It tells you how to believe. And I oftentimes think that the integral people who are kind of latching onto QAnon narratives, they're not doing the full diligence of integral truth and truthfulness and all the falsification and the enactment processes and the injunctions required. And so therefore it just kind of, becomes a new set of narrative beliefs that you're holding on to, like any other religious beliefs that are out there.
Well, that's why I really liked what Eric said.
Yeah.
His response to it was there was a deep sense of moral revulsion.
Right.
To it. And it was confusing because these are fellow members of his town, and he goes, okay, how do I make sense of that distress and the fear that's associated with it also? I mean, the psychology of this is a terrifying psychology. I mean, it's a brown shirt psychology. It's a national. It's the psychology that gradually marginalized the intellectuals in Germany in the 30s and led to the atrocities. And so his response was a visceral response going, how do I make sense of this in a way that's not Pollyanna, but also that's not dissociative?
Right.
And maybe we don't come up with an answer, but if that's what we're trying to do, then we're supporting our personal evolution and the evolution of consciousness. If that's the question that we rest in.
Right. No, it's beautifully said. Because for me, it's all about taking this energy that comes up, that gets activated, and then plugging it into wider and wider and broader contexts. So for me, when I do the work, I realize, I'm not actually annoyed with you. I mean, not really, right? What I'm annoyed with is the fact that we live in this era of aperspectival madness where ideas like QAnon can gain so much traction, right? So that's where my anger is placed. But then I do the work on that and I say, well, how angry am I at that? I mean, Ken Wilber literally wrote a book 20 years ago, pretty much predicting this. I mean, all of this is right on schedule. And in fact, is creating the right set of circumstances for this next integral stage to actually begin gaining more influence. So the shadow kind of empties itself out into this perception, a largely cognitive perception of this kind of general historic flow towards bigger, better, bolder, more expansive, more integral kind of stages of becoming. So when I actually sort of see it as that, it's like, oh, this is a real problem and it's causing real suffering. And I get frustrated that so many people get caught in it. And this is exactly where we need to be. These are the exact kind of epistemic breakdowns that we require in order for something like Integral to actually emerge and generate real influence in this world. And then all of a sudden I'm hopeful again. Right?
Yeah, people forget that we need the backsliding, we need the regression, we need the, the mistakes and the, repeating history. It's like the 2 steps backwards, 3 steps forwards, 2 steps backwards, or whatever.
It's like a Paula Abdul song.
Disintegration before reintegration. In that sense, the person who's been most accurate about this whole period of time has been Steve Bannon.
Yeah.
Steve Bannon was just flat out from the beginning. He says, I want the whole structure to be deconstructed. So that there'll be a new reconstruction. He's the one that was the most accurate in predicting what was going to go on, and he's the one that's doing in a way exactly what he said he was going to do. Well, he's also ripping everybody off and embezzling and doing all the other weird, crazy, self-indulgent stuff that power god people do. But at least in terms of what he said.
Yep. We call that the Darth Vader move. Steve Bannon is clearly someone who has a cognitive intelligence that's like beyond most other people in politics. But his moral intelligence is, well, he's literally stealing money and buying yachts with money being donated to this bogus wall campaign.
They're the most dangerous people, right? Because like that was
100%.
like, isn't Hitler a good example, right? The charisma and the morality.
Yep.
Yeah, right. That's why I'm. The only thing about Trump that I like is his lack of ambition.
That's right, and that he's incompetent.
All he cares about is just Trump. So
he's really good at manifesting.
Yeah, he's good at manifesting. Yeah. So it's like ambition.
Like he's very single-minded. There's like nothing,
Well, and to go with
guilt to get in the way.
To go with the theme of today, all throughout today, what 3 of us have been doing, what Eric's been doing, and what Nat was doing. All of us are going, okay, so what are we doing? What's happening now? Okay, how does that inform me about my constructive, destructive shadow? I'm using my language now, but where am I finding myself in this thing that I'm reacting to? So basically the whole show today has been an embodiment of 3-2-1, 1-2-3-1, 1-2-3. We've been doing that the whole show.
Yep.
We've been doing it. I just want to weigh in again on this is not a cognitive system, purely a cognitive system. It's an embodied system, and we've been running it off of what we feel. We've been running it around our embodied experience with each other, and commenting from those embodied experiences, and that's what makes it yummy. Okay, and that's why I'm not dismissing cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm embracing that. In the deeper understanding that we have in Integral, that body, mind, spirit, and self-culture and nature is where it's all at all the time. And if you're going to do a psychotherapy, if you're missing any of those elements, then that's a partial psychotherapy.
That was a beautiful pointing out, Keith. And I loved, feeling like the simultaneity of these layers that we've sort of put together in this conversation with each other. It's true. I mean, I would say there's more heart space here than there is head space even. And there's a lot of head space.
So on that note, let's declare victory. Declare victory on this podcast. And much love to everybody.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. Zoe, it's so nice to meet you. Please do come back.
I would love that.
Yeah. And let's definitely stay in touch. Keith, I love you, buddy. And we'll get back together next month. In the meantime, everyone, seriously, join these practices. They're for members only. You have to be a member of integrallife.com for the invite. They have been amazing, super intimate. The feedback we're receiving has been just extraordinary. So become a member, check it out. And you too, Zoe. I hope you check it out too. In the meantime, I love you all, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.